Yeah, okay. Good evening, welcome everyone. This is the Local Government Advisory Committee meeting for the City of Grand Forks, Wednesday, January 12th, 2022. Under item 1, introductions and roll call.
Sandy?
Here.
Mock? Here. Buczynski?
Here.
Mikula?
Here.
Carpenter?
Here.
Falk? Engen?
Here.
Hellier?
Here.
We have quorum.
Great, and let the record show that Mr. Lancaster, Yes, Mr. Lancaster. Jeff, my buddy Jeff is here as well. Under item 2, Fufang Development. Yeah, Mr. Field.
Hey, thank you, Council President Sandy and members of the Local Government Advisory Committee. Last time we were together, I think we're almost a little over a year ago. We had 4 projects, so we got a couple in front of you today, and so it's kind of an exciting time for Grand Forks that we continue to move forward. And all the pressure's on you, Jeff, tonight on getting these through. We're gonna tackle one of these at a time if everyone's good with that. So with the Fufang Group Limited wet corn mill, we're going to present on that. And so Keith Lund and I from the Grand Forks Region EDC, we're going to go over the PowerPoint presentation. And then I'm going to ask Eric Schudrash to introduce himself on behalf of Fufang Group along with his team here. And so he'll introduce himself and just do a welcome and hello, here's who I am, so kind of thing. And then I'm going to call on Maureen's going to come up and provide the financial forecast with this particular project. And then finally, we've asked Mr. Gosthead, our city attorney, to go over the tax incentive process and what happens with both of these projects. And so once he gets done with his briefing, that'll kind of encompass the Fufang project and also the Olivan project. So with that, I'd ask Mr. Lund to kick us off, and then I'll come up after him.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Lund.
Good evening, Council President Sandy, members of the committee. Keith Lund with the Grand Forks Region Economic Development Corporation. I've been asked to go over about half of this PowerPoint presentation, provide an overview of the project, the company, and what they'll be doing in Grand Forks, what the plan is, and Todd will take it from there and talk a little bit about the infrastructure investments that are proposed to support the project, and then the rest will be outlined as Mr. Phelan indicated. So we announced some time ago, and we're really excited, the Fufang USA project is what we believe is the largest private investment in Grand Forks County history, a large agribusiness project. Want to talk a little bit about who Fufang Group is, and limited global leading biofermentation company. Just a little bit beyond the PowerPoint slide, the company was founded in 1999. Is publicly traded on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, globally has 14,000 employees, sales in 115 countries, currently 6 plants in China. This would be their first plant outside of China. And they have 2 offices within the United States, and they have not production, but distribution markets in the U.S. and looking to expand that through this expansion. In terms of what they do, so you see here on the PowerPoint slide the different types of, value streams they have as a company, food additives, amino acids, animal nutrition, and others. In addition to the information on this slide that shows what a diverse company they are in the agribusiness sector, they have companies and customers that you would recognize, such as Nestle, Kraft, Heinz, Cargill Ingredient, Halliburton, and Baker Hughes. So a lot of customers that you would recognize. In terms of what the company will do with the facility in Grand Forks, it's a wet corn milling plant and manufacturing food additives. And in terms of the finished products, really they're looking at animal nutrition feed formulations that are essential for livestock and pet food. Want to just give you just a quick snapshot of the employment and the economic benefits to the region. I want to be clear that the only number that we got from the company is the direct employment of 233 at full build out, but we have run this project through sort of the economic multipliers and sort of impact analysis to try to understand the larger benefit to the community. So I'm going to start in the middle, my apologies, but at full build out, estimate the 233 direct jobs at the plant will be employed at the facility. We believe that there will be additional 525 to over 500 jobs created in our community as a result in the region, and those are direct and indirect and induced. And an indirect job would be a job that exists because of the plant, and you can think transportation and the like, that the people that are employed providing services directly to the plant. And the induced jobs that are created in your community are those that are created because of community growth that are supported by this project, but aren't necessarily working at the plant or in support directly of the plant. Our estimate in terms of the 2.5 years to build the project, and we estimate there'll be 1,000 jobs created in the construction, and the number on that is $41 million over a 2.5 year period of time. Operationally, as I mentioned, 758, just a little over 700 jobs at 46.2, nearly $47 million ongoing as the plant is operational. So a significant employment boost to the community as well. And thinking about the school district, we ran what an estimate could be for potential school children as a result of the growth at the plant, and the number that we came up was 53. So we think that there will be an additional more than 50 students that will be in the Grand Forks public school system as a result of the permanent employment that's created at this plant. And we can do some multipliers on that, the school district, in terms of what that means to the district. Wanted to give a sense of, some of the key metrics and what the Fufang was looking for when they were looking for a site in North America and ultimately the United States. They needed a large site, 370 acres, which they have secured in terms of negotiations in Grand Forks, just North Grand Forks. 25 million bushels of corn in terms of the feedstock, the input. Sounds like a big number, and it is, but it is a lower percentage in terms of corn that's produced in North Dakota and Minnesota, so we have the capability to provide that. Natural gas, it's a significant natural gas consumer in terms of, but they'll be using that natural gas for electric production primarily. Significant water demand, 6.6 million gallons per day. In terms of wastewater, in terms of what's returned to the system, a little over 3 million. Electricity, as I mentioned, they'll be using natural gas primarily for the production of electricity, but there will need to be a backup. So 15 megawatts is what they're going to need for a backup. So they needed a community and an electrical grid that had the capacity to provide that. And there will be transportation needs as well. 150 inbound cars per week, 180 outbound cars per week in terms of rail. And then truck transportation, 877 inbound and 403 outbound trucks per week. I want to give a sense of really how we got here, and then I'll turn it over to Mr. Phelan. This opportunity, opportunity comes to, and we develop opportunities through a number of sources. This particular one came from the North Dakota Department of Commerce. Many projects and site selectors in the company did initially use a site selector. Take a look at sites, states in particular that have business climates that are conducive to what they're doing, that also have other things that they need, such as corn. So North Dakota and a couple other sites were, met that criteria. So we responded to an RFP through the North Dakota Department of Commerce in June of 2020, and we understand there were about 50 competitive sites that the company was looking at that time. The company, Mr. Truderosh, who he'll introduce, made her first trip to Grand Forks in October 2020. That was an opportunity for us to kind of talk about the detail of the proposal and how the community could serve the project if they would choose Grand Forks. At that time, we were at 4 competitive sites, one in North Dakota, the Grand Forks site, 2 in Iowa, and 1 in Nebraska, as we understand. Came back in March of 2020, and there were 3 sites that were viable at that time, or at least that they were pursuing. That was a community visit site, I guess, get to know, is this a place where we would want to invest? Do we like the community, I guess, simply said, and the answer to that seems to be yes. July of 2022, they came back to Grand Forks, and really that conversation was finalizing some of the discussions about specifics of infrastructure and the support that the community and the state could provide in supporting them. We were one of 2 at that time, and then in November, Mayor Buczynski received a call from Mr. Truderosh and was informed that the company had chosen as its first option Grand Forks as a site for their investment. So that's just a little overview of the time it took to get here and the steps that we took to get to this place this evening. And the project site in North Grand Forks, and this is where I'll turn it over to Mr. Phelan to talk about the specifics of the site as well as the infrastructure that's needed to support the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lund. Mr. Phelan.
Thank you, Keith. Council President Seni. The site it's adjacent to Gateway Drive, I-29, and obviously it's near a prime transportation corridor north of Simplot. And so when we look at this site, it is a 330-acre site, so it's a large site. It's bounded on the north by our diversion, our English Coulee diversion, so that's kind of the northernmost part of. It's also bounded on Highway 81 going north. So it's really in a prime agribusiness corridor in our community. I think when you look at those numbers that Keith showed, the 3 million gallons per day of wastewater, the 6 million gallons per day of water supply, that's large. And so if you look at J.R. Simplot, which is a potato processing facility in Grand Forks, that's probably 2 and 2. Two on wastewater, million gallons per day, 2 in water. So this is incrementally larger, but it's probably the nearest close competitor that we have in our community as J.R. Simplot from how we serve them from an agribusiness perspective. This is the conceptual plot layout of the facility. So this is what we were showed from Fufang. Number one, we want to show how would this lay out over that 330 acre site. And it certainly nestles in there quite well with all the various component parts of that particular facility. The mayor and the city administration and Keith Lund, we're gonna go down and take a look at a couple of Cargill facilities. We're not going to perhaps get into the facilities, but we're going to go visit some community and find out more about these facilities, how have communities engaged with them, and what have they found has been successful or things we ought to learn and understand. So this is a Fort Dodge, Iowa facility, one of the ones we're going to go see. We're also going to go visit the community, Blair, Nebraska, which is north of Omaha. We're going to go visit their facility, another Cargill similar facility. But you can see what this facility looks like with the rail yard and with the facility. And I think it looks most closely what you would think we have in our own community with J.R. Simplot, but with a rail yard and just a more robust facility than what we have with J.R. Simplot. This is a large map of how we're intending to serve this particular facility. And this is a significant infrastructure support need for our community to do it. So all the various colors have all the various infrastructures. I'm just going to step through all of these areas. So as we go through all these various activities and these infrastructure pieces that we're working on, Mr. Goss said, and working with Fufang, we're working on a development agreement that will spell out how we intend to serve this facility, what the financial assurances and requirements are, how we're going to get fees, whether they're in utility fees or in special assessments. So that'll be spelled out in an agreement. They'll also have parts of the agreement that will have things that we want as part of environmental assurances and all those things that we require of any large industry coming through our community. So when I step through these agreements, we are working on a development agreement. Within that development agreement, there's a side pilot agreement, and that's why we're here today. Within that pilot, there is the request and the demand for the 90% pilot over the first 10 years and 75% over the second 10 years. And so that's embedded in the development agreement and is part of an appendix in a pilot tax agreement too. So we're getting out front, getting this lined up so that by the time the development agreement is approved, we're well within this part of moving forward with the pilot agreement. Again, we've said this many times, to support this particular industry, we're looking at between 85 and 104, and if we looked at today where we think we are with cost estimates, we're probably in and around $95 million to serve this in the various infrastructures. That's water, wastewater, stormwater, and transportation infrastructure. And in all of those cases, we have various mechanisms within the agreement that we're going to help pay for those facilities, whether they're fees or special assessments or other type of ways that we have moved forward. So this agreement with spelling out all these various infrastructure pieces will go through the city council and we'll specify how we're going to serve them and how we're going to be reimbursed. Just to go over them quickly, these are the water improvements that we intend on making in the particular area. And so this is just the water main to serve them from a fire flow perspective. Again, this area north of town, the significant portion we're also looking at taking it, incorporating ourselves into what currently is an Agassiz rural water system, and so certainly Grand Forks has the flow and capability to serve this area. So one of the entities we're going to have to work with is Agassiz rural water as part of this. So we're going to be in negotiations and discussions with them on how we intend to serve them, because this area is currently being served by a rural water entity. And you can see also along Highway 81 North or North Washington, that's an area, if you look at it, it's bounded by OP on the north, in and around, and by the south, S&S Transport. We're going to have to look at, talk with those adjacent property owners, because this land will be annexed into the city. And it, with all the various infrastructure pieces, we're going to be serving not only the Fufang group, wet corn mill, but we're going to be serving the adjacent areas that are not currently annexed into the city of Grand Forks. So there'll be a lot of discussions on the planning and zoning side and the annexation and how we're going to serve these various areas. So there's not only the facility itself, but it's those adjacent areas that are not annexed into the city. If you look at this map, Mill Road entities are annexed into the city, these properties. However, the North Washington areas are not annexed into the city. So, but we're going to be, at the end of this project, we're going to be serving the whole large area. Again, this is just the transportation piece. The important part of this is that we're going to be improving roads, but we're also going to have to work with the North Dakota DOT because we're going to have to make some improvements on the state highways, which will include Highway 81 going north. And so we're going to be into conversations with the North Dakota DOT on how to move forward from not only a permitting perspective, but also a funding and improvement perspective. This is a sanitary sewer, and in Grand Forks, we put in a pump station that serves a square mile in a community, and then we use force mains and collection systems. So really, this map shows that there's going to be a lot of underground sewer system that is going to be served. So wastewater is the largest single improvement we're going to have to make in our system, and I think on the map that I just showed you a little while ago, 60+ million of that almost 100 million is going to be in wastewater, whether those are improvements at the wastewater treatment plant or whether they're new improvements with the collection system that we're going to have to do to serve wastewater to get it to our wastewater treatment plant. One of the questions we get, 6 million gallons per day of water supply is a lot of water for Grand Forks. So we have a water treatment plant that's rated up to 20 million gallons per day. Our average day in a winter day is probably 8 to 9 million gallons per day, and maybe in a summer day, like last summer, we got up to about 16 million gallons per day with our new water treatment plant. What we're proposing with this particular facility, which I think is one of the unique parts, is Fufang is going to have their own water treatment system on their site. So they're going to want to treat their water supply to a certain condition as part of their processing. And so what we're proposing is to, and this investment is about $17 million. We're going to go to the North Dakota State Water Commission to ask for a 60% cost share on this water supply improvement. But really, we're going to put two new pumps in our raw water intake. We're going to draw water from the Red River. We're going to use the existing transmission pipeline that goes down the Demers Avenue corridor. We're going to build a pump station in and around our water treatment plant, and then we're going to build new distribution lines to our agribusiness park north of Simplot to serve Fufang. So this will be served with raw water. We will not push this through our water treatment plant, but we will get a permit from the state of North Dakota to do it, and then we'll also hopefully get a 60% cost share to serve this from an industrial water supply in this particular case. Lots of stormwater improvements, and so I mentioned our flood protection project is really important to the city of Grand Forks, and so one of the things we have to do, we have to make sure that whatever we do in development, that we don't harm our flood protection system from an inside-out perspective. So some of the stormwater will go north to the diversion, some of it will go to the English Coulee to the south, and we're going to be developing infrastructure to serve this particular property along the way. Again, today, and this will, all of this will end up in our development agreement. The payment in lieu of taxes we're talking about today. The mayor, on behalf of the greater state, we really worked hard in this special session to get that natural gas pipeline from the Bakken to the east. And the state of North Dakota set aside $10 million to serve the initial pipe going from east to Grand Forks County. And so that's part of the really important part. Water is really important, and natural gas is really important part of this. So the state's all in on supporting Grand Forks from a natural gas perspective, and also has set aside money. That's ongoing. We are working with the state, and I'll mention all the state agencies. So we're working from a permitting and a funding perspective, whether it's grant funding or whether it's long-term interest financing through the state of North Dakota. So we're working with the State Water Commission. We're working with the Bank of North Dakota. We're going to work with the North Dakota Department of Transportation on all the various components, to include the North Dakota Department of Environmental Quality. So we're working with 4 or 5 different state agencies, not only in the permitting side, but also in the funding and financing on all this. So more to come on that. And we have meetings scheduled in this first quarter to start moving out on all those various pieces. I want to give a big shout out to the mayor and the city administration went to Grand Forks County to ask for some of their ARPA dollars that can be spent for water and wastewater infrastructure. They committed out of their pot of money that they received with ARPA, they committed $3 million to the wastewater component for this agribusiness opportunity, knowing that this business is certainly being hosted in the city of Grand Forks, but it has a large regional presence, right? We don't grow corn in the city of Grand Forks, but we certainly serve the region. And so thank you to the Grand Forks County Commission for approving that. That's going to help buy down some and provide some grant assistance and all that. And the various components that the state already provides, you know, whether it's the corporate income tax, the sales and use tax, jobs training, and North Dakota PACE. And the one thing the state of North Dakota really incentivizes well is agribusiness. Obviously, we're an agricultural state, and they are also investing in trying to grow the value add to that crop, and we're certainly right at the heart of the moment with this particular project moving forward. With that, I'm going to stop, and I'm going to ask Eric Schuterash to come up here and introduce himself along with Jack and Kevin from Fufang Group Limited, and just to say welcome, and then after that I'm going to ask Maureen to come up and go over that spreadsheet for you for the pilot. Eric.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. So on behalf of Fufang Group, I'm Eric Schuterash, the COO of Fufang USA, and I'd like to introduce Jack Bao, who's our President of Overseas Development, and then Kevin Zhao, who's an analyst on the team. We really appreciate the time this evening to, by the advisory council to talk about our project here. Like I think it was Keith outlined the how long it's been going on. It's really exciting to see discussions that started in the fall of 2020 go through the process and finally come to a conclusion with us choosing Grand Forks as our new North American home. You know, I really do appreciate all the effort from the city team and the EDC and the hard work and multiple phone calls and seeing this through and, welcoming us during, multiple visits, to get us to this point. And, we look forward to continue to work with those teams and this council committee going forward. Pass it over.
Go ahead, Maureen. Yeah.
Thank you, Eric. Maureen, Ms.
Yes,
Dorset.
thank
Good
you.
evening.
All right, President Sandy, members of the committee. So what I've been asked to present to you tonight is just an illustration of the property tax impact based on the pilot that's being presented to you tonight. As Todd stated, this pilot is based on a 90% exemption from property tax in the first 10 years upon completion of the project, and 75% exemption on the next 10 years. Before I begin, I just wanted to point out a couple items that these numbers are estimates based on information provided at this time. And of course, this will go through an annual assessment process to determine actual value. Also, for illustration purposes, it's also assumed the value is consistent over this 20-year period of time, and the number of mills levied is constant over that time period. That, of course, too, will go through its annual process of determination. With that, we put this together, this illustration of estimated property tax collections in total, and we've also broken this down by the taxing entities. I've provided for you here the lightly shaded gray, the first 10-year period based on the 90% exemption, and therefore, of course, 10% collections on the estimated true and full value of the building value. We did add a column here for the value of the land, as that is not subject to the exemption and is fully taxable upon completion. Then the slightly darker gray shaded area represents the years 11 to 20, which is based on that 25% collections of that exempted portion, and again, 100% from the land. So although this exemption It's proposed the result of this project coming to completion is increased tax revenue for all the taxing entities that is not currently being collected. So what we did was we just put together a graphic for you based on those estimates that represents this additional tax revenue that would be generated, like I said, based on the assumptions and the estimates provided during those pilot periods. The blue line, of course, representing if the project does not move forward, and the green line is after project. With that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Dan for his review.
Mr. Costa, good evening.
Thank you. I'll be brief. There was a staff report that outlined the kind of the background that I think was posted today, and I'll just really briefly go through the process to so that the members of the LEGAC are at least familiar with the process. We're talking about payment in lieu of taxes, and the statute allows you to use either actual or estimated levels of assessment. There are other factors that can be played into it. And as Maureen just went through, we're going to be using actual assessments and actual true and full value in the calculation in the pilot, and I'll go through that in a minute. But that's what Maureen showed you, we're going to be applying actual numbers each year. Because each year, on November 1, the city assessor will certify to the county auditor what that number is as far as the property taxes are concerned for this particular structure. As Maureen pointed out, it only applies to buildings and structures. It does not apply to land. A pilot can last up to 20 years. And the statutes contemplate that there's negotiation with the developer, which then leads into the pilot agreement. We're in the process of negotiating the pilot agreement with the Fufang Group today. I haven't started with Olivan, but I'll talk about some of the basic provisions that you would expect to see in a pilot that we've incorporated in other pilot agreements. This board is here to provide a non-binding recommendation to the respective taxing entities. There is a provision that talks about school board being a non-voting ex officio member for deliberation and negotiation, and I think this is what this LEGAC is about and satisfies that provision. As you know, if it's more than 5 years, which both pilot proposals are here today, more than 5 years, the process requires that there is notice being given to both the county and the school board. They have a period of 30 days to respond to that letter, which outlines what the pilot is going to be. If there's no response, it means that they're deemed to participate in the pilot. If there is a response, they have to delineate what those reasons are and if they're willing to negotiate. One thing that this was fairly new legislation to go through this process with the county and school board was adopted. I can't remember exactly when, but not too long in the distant past. And I've done some research on this, and if by chance one of the political subdivisions, the county and the school board or the school district wouldn't participate, doesn't mean the pilot can't go forward. It would mean just that portion, if the school district had 30%, that portion of the property would continue to be subject to taxation, but the balance of it could still go forward. The next step after we go through the process of notifying the county and the school board is for the city council to conduct a public hearing. We provide notice to competitors, and within that, we're to determine, the city council is determining whether the pilot is in the best interest of the city. Some of the factors that would play in is consistent with the general plan. You think with respect to at least the Olivan, there are some identified benefits. There was a staff report issued back in December 20th of 2021 that outlines some of the benefits from that particular project. Obviously, the project for Fufang was outlined by Mr. London and Mr. Phelan as far as the benefits from employment, things like that. So there'd be findings that would be made by the city council with respect to reaching that conclusion that it's in the best interest of the city. One of the things that we cannot do is we can't supersede these procedures or other provisions in 4057.103 that set out the substantive provisions, the process, and termination provisions. There are, by statute, statutory termination events with respect to the pilot in the future. One of which is, for example, a change of ownership would precipitate the pilot terminating. Or if the property, if there's a substantial improvement to the property. And I think that the reason that is in there is so that somebody doesn't get a pilot and then all of a sudden with the anticipation that it's going to be a $5 million project when in fact it's a $500 million project to get a larger pilot exemption than was anticipated. That's not the case with either one of them, but that's statutorily in there. The one thing that to be mindful of is even though there's a change in the operator or possession of either one of these projects, the new project operator could apply to continue on that pilot for the remainder of the term. So if there was 15 years left, that project operator could come in and make application for that. And we'd go through the same process for that new project operator. Some of the basic terms that I've included, expect to include within the pilots for these two projects, there'll be construction standards and requirements. Of course, with the separate development agreement with Fufang, those are items that we're in the process of negotiating. But I'd expect that type of provision to be there, that they have to meet the construction standards for the city. If there's targeted commencement and completion dates, those are targeted. The ending date is really the most important because that's when the pilot becomes effective, the next taxing year after the project is complete. If there are changes to the development, the terms of the pilot generally require that those be reviewed by the city in advance. Again, kind of going back to that provision about not overbuilding something that we had anticipated. The most important provision is how does this pilot get calculated on an annual basis? And that spreadsheet that Mr. Orsted just went through, what I do is memorialize how you calculate that spreadsheet so that 5 years hence or 10 years hence, if somebody's looking at the agreement, they can figure out how to do the calculation. And what we do is we take the original property value, and in this case, with Fufang, I'll use that as the example. Right now, there are no buildings out there, so the original value would be zero for purposes of the calculation. We're expecting that the value of the buildings after it's completed, the estimate, is going to be $352 million, okay? We would take then that $352 million and multiply that times 90%. And that gets me to about $320 million. So I'll take that delta between the 350 and the 320, and that 30 million is really what would be subjected to property taxation, and the city assessor would then apply the mill rate as it exists in 2027, 2028, whatever that mill rate is at that time, would apply it to that valuation along with the valuation of the land, and that becomes the payment under the pilot agreement. And that's where we tie into, as values change, as the mill rate changes, then the pilot can change. And we can do that under the statutes. You can have differing numbers over the course of the pilot by statute. And by November 1 of each year, the city assessor will certify those type of numbers. There are also going to be conditions in the agreement before the pilot becomes effective. The most important is that the project is completed. Substantially completed is usually the term that's used, and that there's been no default under the terms of that particular agreement. There will also be termination provisions similar to what's in the statute. Those are be preserved. And finally, that in my agreements, that these properties are not eligible for any other type of property tax incentive during the term of the pilot, but they're still subject to special assessments and things like that. So if you have any questions for me, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Any questions from Mr. Gosted?
Council President,
Thank you.
if I
Mr.
could,
Phelan.
I'll fill in a couple dates. We are intending to bring this matter, both matters of the pilots for both projects, to the city council meeting next week, Tuesday, to set the public hearing date. Ask the city council to move forward and set the public hearing date. Right now, we are prospectively looking at a city council meeting on February 22nd, in which Mr. Goss had described the public hearing. That would be the public hearing date. And then in between, obviously setting it on the 18th, and then on that public hearing, we would come to you as a board and to ask for approval. That's what we have done before. We haven't wanted to take a chance about, if we don't come and brief you on it, to get you to not just be silent on it, but have some sort of general concurrence. But similar to what we did last time, we would come to your boards. We obviously went to the Park District, just because you're right, wrong, or indifferent, you're part of us. And just to give you a briefing on what's coming, and then obviously to the county and the school board, we came to those meetings too. So we anticipate late January into February, we'd be at your governing boards leading up to the final public hearing date. With that, Council President Sandy, that's what we have this evening on this matter.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Phelan. Are there any questions for Mr. Phelan or Ms. Storsted or related to the Fufeng project? Yeah, Ms. Mock, please.
Thank you so much. Let's see. So I'm still getting a few phone calls and questions about kind of how Grand Forks was selected. There was a little bit of detail on, there was an RFP process and some of that criteria. So I guess one point that I want to maybe focus on a little bit, you mentioned that it's a publicly traded company. Can you expand just a little bit more on what that means and whether there's any government funds involved in the facility?
Sure. I'm going to defer on the publicly traded question to Mayor Buczynski. I would say, why were we selected? We always like to think because we're the best, right? And so, number one, we were aggressive. We were competitive, and we wanted to deliver this project. Why? Because we're an agricultural state. We're right in the midst of it here in the Red River Valley. I think that's the first step. Number two, we worked hard on the natural gas pipeline. That was a big deal. Number three, we're a regional center with all the various infrastructure pieces from water, wastewater, transportation. We can host a facility like this. So I think that all being said, and I think we have a community that will embrace companies like Fufeng Group and will want to expand our agribusiness sector. And so it was a natural fit for Grand Forks. We probably weren't the likely choice. It probably made more sense to be in places we're going to go down in Iowa or Nebraska. We're in the heart of that Corn Belt. But you know what? The Corn Belt's moving north, and we're in a really good position. And we're a really terrific community where you'd want to locate your company here in Grand Forks. That's my answer on that, and I'll defer the rest to Mayor Buczynski.
Yeah, thank you. I think, and Mr. Bombach might be able to answer for the company themselves, but obviously publicly traded is pretty simple. You could go onto the Hong Kong Stock Exchange and buy shares in the company if you wish to, Ms. Mock. Wouldn't recommend it during this process, though. As far as I've heard, that doesn't have, there's no government ownership, at least from what I've heard, and maybe they can clarify that, but I'm pretty sure that was the case, so.
That's correct.
There you go.
Okay.
Thanks.
Brandon, do you have anything we missed that you'd like to? Okay.
Ms. Mock, additional questions?
Yes. And we're confident that we do have the corn supply that they're looking for going forward.
Yeah, Councilmember Mock, the mayor's got some, always has a good one paragraph on this, so I'm going to turn it over to him. He's got the math on, because we've gotten that question, hey,
Yep.
there's no corn in our area. There's got to be something up with this whole thing, but I think the mayor's got the answer on that one.
Okay.
Well, if you look at just the state of North Dakota and the state of Minnesota, you've got 286 million bushels of corn per year produced in North Dakota and 1.44 billion bushels of corn produced in Minnesota. So if you combine that, this plant using 25 million bushels would be approximately 1.4% of the corn just in those two states. So I think part of the reason that they're interested in here is they think the corn market is good and there is plenty of corn here. So that's probably another piece that made us, it's probably an untapped market when it comes to that feedstock. So probably another part of the reason that they're very interested in this region.
And I think, just for the public too, is, when Fufang Group has come to town, EDC has done a really terrific job getting them to the various stakeholders. And so, not only is they've met with regional farmers that with high credibility that are investing in their farm operations, investing in their value-added crops that they're growing too. And so, they've had some great visits around our community, and so it's just reaffirmed what we have in our community from an agricultural perspective and why this makes sense to deliver this project here.
And I imagine that an investment of this size, they're doing that work for themselves as well to make sure that all of these things would be sustainable for their business operations. One of the things mentioned was the water supply, and that we would be seeking an additional industrial permit, and then with the raw water, this wouldn't go through our water treatment plant, so we wouldn't treat that water. That would go directly to the company and they would treat it. Is there any concern on getting that additional appropriations for water, or is that something? I guess I'm still a little confused. We're talking about this from more of the taxing perspective, but some of these things seem pretty important for the ability of the project to move forward. Is that part of the development agreement? And
Yep.
if something like that wasn't possible, would we revisit everything else involved with the project?
Yeah, Councilmember Mogg, that will be part of the development agreement. And certainly we have applied to the State Water Commission for funding of that $17 million raw water. So there'll be two things. We'll ask for a permit. We do have permit authority up to 30 million gallons per day on the Red River. Currently, and I said our average day is 10 million gallons per day, a vast majority of that comes from the Red Lake River. So we have plenty of appropriation in our primary permit. We do have other industrial permits to draw water from the Red River. So I don't think it's not going to be a permitting perspective. We are going to have to work with the State Water Commission, and I think they're called the North Dakota Department of Water Resources now, is the department specifically. But we've applied. We're going to have to make the argument that this is a great way to serve our agribusiness park, and that they should want to help cost share this up to 60%. So there'll be plenty of due diligence on what we're doing with that infrastructure. And I think it's the best way to do it. We're not pushing it through our water treatment plant. That why treat something twice? And so they're gonna treat the water the way they want it, and I think it's just a really good way to do what we're doing with the water supply.
Okay, and then we don't have to worry about the treatment costs of the water to supply it,
Yes.
so then it can just be that.
Yep.
And then, as we move forward, I guess I would have questions on the impact to, our rail system, the transportation system, and some of those, fully understanding what those impacts might be. Will we take a closer look at that as a city council as we move forward with more of the design details of the project?
Yeah, you will, Councilmember Mock. As part of the development agreement, it requires a traffic impact study. The North Dakota DOT isn't required anyway, so we've already moved out on some of those early engineering studies to include the traffic. So we're going to have to look at the traffic on 81 and Gateway Drive, our Highway 2, our interstate system, and then 27th Avenue. So we're going to be in not only the surface transportation, truck traffic, but also the rail traffic, because that'll not only the rail traffic, but it'll also impact the surface transportation system. So we've already moved out administratively to move forward with that traffic study and working with the North Dakota DOT.
Okay. And when will we start to have those conversations more at a council level?
So on the 18th, we're going to ask you to set the public hearing on the pilot. We have a meeting tomorrow with Fufang Group and their attorney, and so still at the negotiation stage, so we're going to have some further meeting tomorrow afternoon. So hopefully we make really great progress. At the very least on Tuesday of next week at the City Council, Mr. Gosted will provide an overview of where we're at in negotiations. And with the intent of, if not on the 18th, at a City Council meeting in the very near future, we're going to be presenting a final draft for the City Council to begin to review and ask questions, and with the intentions of having a final approval. I would say on targeting probably a final approval of a development agreement in the first part of February.
Okay. So in terms of this specifically, we're talking about the tax incentive portion, and then we'll get more details on the breakdown of city, state, or cost share, what's going to be through utility rates and things like that as we move forward. Because I think there's still a little confusion as to how much the city is being asked to spend for it to come forward, or the assurances. And I think it's reasonable with a project this large, if anything would happen, that we have some assurance that, you know, something we're planning to pay for 20 years, that we would be able to come out okay, and we wouldn't be risking too much. But we'll get more of those details again, like in February, as we move it forward.
You will. And even if we can get to the January 24th committee of the whole meeting, that's another targeted meeting. And I think you just summed up probably the heart of one of the matters we're going to be talking about tomorrow is the risk, and how do we balance that between the private developer and the city of Grand Forks, and how do we find a constructive way forward for both entities. And so I think that's going to be a large discussion point tomorrow morning or tomorrow afternoon. And so you'll see that come back in the development agreement, and Mr. Gosted will line that out. That's been one of the major discussion items.
Okay. So then again, with this, if we chose not to move forward with the tax incentive, we're talking about $0 increase in additional taxes, so we would be at a stay even point. If we decided to move forward, we're talking about 90% for the first 10 and 75% for the second 10 years. And then that was the information that Ms. Dorset provided for the additional per sub. Okay.
And I think this one's really, and we just try to highlight the infrastructure pieces to our local government partners, is that above and beyond the tax revenue, we're all going to receive, you know, we have a big lift on the infrastructure, and we're going to protect ourselves and moving forward that to serve this particular industry. But again, this land is not annexed into the city. It is in the county. It's valued at ag land, and so it's going to be brought into the city, annexed into the city. We're going to add infrastructure to it, which is going to raise the value of the property, which is always going to be taxable, as Mr. Gosted. You know, we've lined it out with our city assessor, estimating the value of $25 million for the land, and that's improved land with infrastructure is what we're assuming. After we do all the water, wastewater, transportation functions, we're going to add value to that particular property. So, but embedded in that development agreement is this pilot, so we got to start moving forward with some of these things. So as we move down this path, that development agreement will be moving in a parallel path.
And that land would be a private sale and privately owned by the company? Is that
Yes.
correct? Okay.
Good questions. Any other? Yes, Mr. Carpenter?
Just a couple brief questions. So the pilot starts when construction is completed and they're ready to start processing corn, correct?
Yeah, we use the term substantially completed, but yes.
Okay. So that, just for clarification to make sure, so this diagram, I mean, this analysis, is really year one is when that
Upon
substantial
completion.
completion takes place. I just don't want anybody to get a thought that all of a sudden the school district's going to collect $315,000 additional dollars this next year. It's down the road, probably 3 years from now before that, 3 or 4 years before that happens. And then also just, right now, that is part of the school district. And so we are collecting some tax, small, based on ag value, just like the county would be.
Yes, and that's incorporated in the comparison of the before dollars. So it was stated, it's currently valued at ag land. So, you know, it's the township, fire district, school. There's about 5,500 annually collected total on that piece of land currently.
Yeah, I knew it wasn't very much, but, and then, so the value of the land may increase as time goes on as you do improvements. So year one was in the middle of construction, if you've completed some. I mean, there is some potential for value based on the land, but the building stuff is one that's substantially completed.
The pilot doesn't become effective until substantial completion. In that interim period of time, my research has revealed that if there is value out there that is subject to property taxation, that value gets taxed
Okay.
at the mill rate during that period of construction.
Okay. Thank you.
Whatever that value is, right?
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Any other? Mayor? Oh, yes, Mr. Mayor? Absolutely.
Yeah, just like the, I think we're, Lease Administration is definitely behind this project. This is all the things that you look for in economic development. You look at the high-paying job that's going to create. It's going to put upward pressure on wages across town, which is a great thing for the whole community. Looked at the increased value that it's going to put on corn acreage, which increases the value of our ag in the region, increases the wealth there. Obviously, the property tax, which is what we're talking about tonight. And, we've got entities that all of us are always starved for revenue, so a great chance to increase revenue there. And I always look at our neighbor to the south, and our taxing, if you look at how we tax as a city, we actually are more than 50% is on our residential property owners. Just to the south, less than 50% is, and the burden falls on industrial and commercial. So this is a great chance to sort of balance that scale a little bit more, where less burden is on residential users, or residential owners, and more gets pushed to industrial and commercial, which is great for the community. And then obviously during the construction, the sales tax and just the spending throughout the community, the hospitality sector, which has obviously been hit very hard. We had to deal with that on Monday night. Has a great opportunity to rebound tremendously, the restaurants, the retail industry. So it's a real boon for 2 to 3 years, but definitely very positive, for the future. So definitely, I believe it's great for the community, great for the city, and city administration is definitely behind it and supporting the project.
Excellent. Thank you, Mayor. So, Mr. Phelan, just a warm, fuzzy feeling, everyone's feeling good about the project?
Yep.
Is there any sort of formal action that you're interested in this evening, or?
We generally ask for a motion that, so when I come to the different entities, that there's been a vote on this, even though it's advisory. So we would like a vote on that 90% first 10 years and second 10 years at 75%, based upon our findings that we've presented.
Thank you, Mr. Phelan. I didn't go to Zoom. I should have asked if anyone on Zoom was interested in providing any input. Hearing none.
Maybe one question, if I may.
Yes, of course, Mr. Hellier.
We talked a little bit about the substantial completion, just the construction period. I may have missed it earlier in the presentation, but what is the expected substantial completion date?
I understand it's end of 2024, and so the first, assuming that gets met, right, the first taxing year that the pilot becomes effective would be 2025 then. If that gets changed, then it gets moved out.
Thank you, Mr. Gostad. Good question. Any other comments or questions? Anyone want to offer an opinion, their own opinion on this opportunity? I'll go with the mayor. I think it's a great opportunity for the city of Grand Forks. I think having spent time with Mr. Bao and Mr. Zhang, I believe that they have not only their best interests in mind, but they're also making a very substantial investment into our community that will benefit the local ag producers and all of the local taxing entities. So I think it's the investment that they want to make proves that they are actually invested in our community. But of course, that's just my opinion.
This is Dave Engen.
Yeah, Mr. Engen.
I've been attending the EDC meetings during the whole course of this, and I will do my best to convince the commission that it's an appropriate project project. I think it's great.
Did you want to make a motion then to approve or take back to all of our governing boards motion of support?
Sure, I can do that.
Thank you, Mr. Ingen. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Ms. Mikula, seconds. Very good. Any other comments? Hearing none, there's a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Item 3 on our list, the Olive Ann development. Mr. Phelan.
Hey, Mr. Sandy or Council President Sandy. Next one is another exciting downtown project that we have been hoping for some time. So we do have a project in front of you this evening. I'm just going to give a broad overview of the project. I'm going to ask Michaela Hewitt from Baker Tilly to give an overview of the but-for test, and recall on these mixed-use projects, we have a financial advisor to help us determine what is really needed from a financial perspective. She'll do that. Marina will come up in a similar form and fashion. We'll kind of give the broad overview of the tax incentive and what does it mean over the taxing years. And then I've asked Julie Rigg from Visit Grand Forks to provide some insight and her thoughts on the project, and also Mr. Lund from the EDC as part of a strategic investment. So this is an exciting project. Marine's going to come up here and talk. There's a little bit of a nuance. There always is a nuance with these mixed-use projects. The nuance with this particular project is the City of Grand Forks has already approved a Renaissance Zone project. And the City of Grand Forks, and we ask for your permission every 5 years to approve the Renaissance Zone. So this is been an approved Renaissance Zone project that, in our policy with the City of Grand Forks, provides a 5-year up to 100% property tax incentive, and also the state provides an income tax incentive as part of that. When we go over this particular project on the pilot in the additional 10 years, what we're asking for in moving forward is an additional 6 to 10 year 100% pilot, and then from years 11 to 15 and 80%. We're only asking it on the boutique hotel itself, and Michaela will go through that. The Renaissance Zone on the Cloud 9 events facility, which is on the top floor of the existing Edgewood building, it will only receive the standard Renaissance Zone 5 years. So tonight the focus is just on the boutique hotel, and so Maureen will go over that, Michaela will go over that from Baker Tilly, but just wanted to start out with that. It is an 89 unit boutique hotel. We first saw this pre-pandemic, and now that we thought we'd be able to say we're post-pandemic, but we're still in this pandemic, the project has changed a little bit. And I think hence the investment in the existing building with the Cloud 9 events, with the reduction in some of the commercial space for obvious reasons with the pandemic. And so the project has changed since we first saw this with the Renaissance Zone. But it's been an adaptation of what it first came forward with. When you look at it from a public policy perspective, regarding what we try to do from a tax incentive, it ticks all the boxes on that as the staff report provides. It hits all the downtown action plan requirements that we want to do of creating a more vibrant downtown and a more vibrant community. So I won't go through all those, but in the staff report that got us really to the local government advisory committee, this has been one of the top things that we really wanted. With the demolition of the former townhouse, we don't have a hotel downtown. We don't have a business type hotel, not only in our downtown, so this really provides a big thing. And if you look at competitive communities in our region, certainly they all have some more than others, competitive downtown hotels. So really the risk on this particular project, and Michaela will go through that, is on the hotel itself, and that's where we're asking for the additional incentive for your review. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Michaela Hewitt from Baker Tilly. She's online, and she's going to step through the analysis she did and the recommendation that we have in front of you, and then I'll ask Maureen to stand up and go over the incentive itself. So,
thank you, Mr. Phelan.
Thanks, Todd. Good evening, President Sandy and members of the committee. Next slide, please. Again, I want to provide a brief overview of the, I know Mr. Gosted went over the incremental tax increment financing and the property incentives, description of the project request in our financial review and analysis, and then as well as our conclusion regarding the financial review. Next slide, please. So again, tax increment financing, and what we're looking at tonight is a method that communities use to capture the incremental taxes that are generated from a new development or redevelopment project. There is a fixed period for the capturing or redirection of that incremental taxes, in this case with the exemption, at which point that new higher tax capacity, higher value taxes would be added to the tax base for all the taxing entities. So really that property tax exemption, that tax increment is generated from that increased property value that is resulting from when a property is developed. Next slide, please. Here's an illustration showing again the teal shaded area. That is the existing taxes that are not exempted for the project. Those are the base taxes, if you will. The incremental taxes is that gray shaded area. That's really the portion that is generated from that new development and is used as the incentive for the project. And then the green chartreuse area, once the property tax exemption is over, the higher tax base is available for all the taxing entities. And Ms. Dorset will be going through what those estimates are for this project following this presentation. Next slide, please. Again, here's just an illustration showing the breakdown between what the taxable market value multiplied by the taxable ratio and the mill rate to get to really what the base taxes and the incremental taxes that we're looking at with the use of the property tax exemption. Next slide, please. So there's generally two common methods for financing costs related to property tax incentives and tax increment. One is upfront, where typically the city would finance the project costs through a bond issuance, and the incremental tax revenues would be used to pay the debt service. The other method is referred to as exemption. And as we'll talk about tonight, we're looking at the Renaissance zone for 5 years. Some of the benefits of property tax exemption is there is a flexibility on terms, meaning the amount that can be provided as an exemption. This would be an annual basis for the developer as an offset to their taxes through the exemption, providing additional cash flow. It is lower risk to the city since it's an exemption and not a bond issuance. And looking at payment in lieu of taxes with a term of up to 20 years. Next slide, please. So why do cities provide incentives and use tax incentives? First and foremost, it's to stimulate development that would otherwise not occur, referring to the but-for test. It's also used to retain and or enhance the tax base. There's a period of time that the taxes are exempted, but at which point the tax base is projected to grow following the tax exemption. It's also used to encourage development in areas that might not otherwise occur or for specific project types. And lastly, it can be used to coordinate new developments within existing plans for the community. Next slide. So the request before the city is the, again, proposed approximate 89 room, hotel, new construction. The cost estimates, I know in the previous materials were estimated to be 25.6. Those numbers have grown to now we're looking at over 27.3 as a total $1 million investment for the project, which includes both construction of the new hotel as well as renovations to the existing building. Construction on the new hotel with assuming the receipt of the tax incentive is expected to start in 2022 and would be complete in 2023. The request from the applicant was for a property tax exemption at 100% for 15 years. That would include the Renaissance zone for 5 years. And the request was for 15 years in both the existing renovation and the new construction hotel. Next slide, please. So based on our review, which I'll go into in the next slides, the recommendation is to focus on the property tax exemption for the new construction hotel only. And that would be looking at, the package would be 100% exemption through the Renaissance zone for years 1 through 5. The next 5 years, years 6 through 10 would be an additional 100% exemption. And then years 11 through 15 would be an 80% exemption. So the effective exemption on the new hotel construction would be 90% over the 10 years after the Renaissance zone. And the existing building renovation, we're looking at a 100% exemption for the Renaissance zone for years 1 through 5, with no exemption in years 6 through 15. And that's in accordance with the but-for test, meaning that those improvements have already started to occur. And so instead we're focusing on the construction of the new hotel itself. So here's just a breakdown of the total project cost. Again, we're looking at the total project now investment being over $27.3 million, and showing a breakout of those costs between the new, the existing building acquisition renovation is about $10.2 million. The hotel construction costs are about $17.1, and there's also some additional improvements to be done to the existing building that would benefit and support the hotel. The estimate of those is about 2.7, so the total hotel investment that we're looking at is about $19.8 million. Next. So in reviewing the financials for based on the request, there's a few pieces that we look at. One is the financial feasibility for the applicant in completing the project as proposed. And in looking at that financial feasibility, we looked at both the hotel only as well as the total the total project. But the focus of the review and the need for financial assistance is based on the performance of the hotel. The pieces that we look at in the cash flow analysis are both the debt coverage, and that's the ability of the revenues from the project to support repayment of the private debt service payments, as well as what the projected return on equity and cash flow to the investors would be when the project is complete and stabilized. We also review what extraordinary costs there might be for the project that is driving the financial gap. Mr. Phelan referred to the public purpose benefits from the project. Also looking at what the availability of funding is to support the total project costs, and that includes the private funding sources being primarily debt and equity, and the ability of the revenues to support the total project costs. And then also review what the type of assistance is and how the city finance, or how the financing is, whether it's upfront or through a property tax exemption. Next slide. So in our financial review, it's really a needs assessment, and it's understanding, first and foremost, is there a need for public assistance, meaning the but-for test, and if there is a need, determine what a reasonable amount of public assistance might be. And again, what we're looking at is the ability of the project to finance any and all public and private improvements, and if they could be supported by the development without any public assistance. In doing so, we do review the developer's financial information and understanding their assumptions relative to the total project costs, funding sources, and then the operating performance. We align the potential funding sources with the project cost for feasibility, and then ultimately what we're understanding is that the development would not occur but for the financial assistance being requested and proposed. So diving into the numbers, we review again the sources and the uses of funds, and focus specifically on the construction of the new hotel. We do prepare and analyze a cash flow model, operating pro forma, which includes the projected operating expenditures with the project, as well as both with and without the property tax exemption, as well as the percentage of tax exemption. And on the revenues, primarily we're looking at the room rates for the hotel, as well as some supporting revenues for other areas. Next slide. So with this assessment, we're really trying to understand what is driving the financial gap. And with that feasibility analysis, we're ultimately understanding what the ability of those revenues are, those annual operating revenues between the room rates and the other rates to really support the operating expenses, as well as provide sufficient cash flow to be able to make the debt service payments and provide a reasonable return to the developer. As part of our review, we also perform sensitivity analysis and really test the assumptions that have been provided, including the absorption rates, the room rates, and the percentage occupancy, and so on related to the project. Next slide. So our conclusion with the financial review is that without the financial assistance, the project does not appear to be feasible. The projected returns without any property tax exemption are below industry standards. And with the financial assistance through the annual property tax exemption, the project performance is projected to improve, and then with the projected rate of returns expected to increase to a reasonable level for the investors. With the financial analysis, we're not expecting that the project would be financially feasible without one or more of the following listed, which would include a reduction in project costs. And as we're showing, the project costs are actually increasing from the original budget proposal. Additional annual cash flow, which would be realized with the property tax exemption, and or additional upfront funding sources. And really the availability of the funding sources, including the debt and equity, are driven by the cash flow performance of the project in the amount of debt that can be supported and the level of equity investment based on the projected returns. So again, with the exemption that's proposed, it would provide that additional cash flow to the project to make it financially feasible. Next slide. So again, based on the financial analysis, the recommendation is we focus on the property tax exemption for the new construction hotel only, and that would be comprised of 100% exemption through the Renaissance zone for years 1 through 5, the next 5 years with the 100% exemption, and then the final 5 years of years 11 through 15 at an 80% exemption. The existing building renovation is split out with, it would include 100% exemption with the Renaissance zone for years 1 through 5, but there would be no additional exemption after year 5. So when looking at that, the estimated blended exemption between the new construction and the existing building would be less than 90% because there are expected to be value or increases as a result of the building renovation. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions or turn it back over.
Thank you, Ms. Hewitt, for that independent financial review. Any questions for Ms. Hewitt? Yes, Mr. Carpenter?
Yeah, I guess I have a few questions. One, in your executive summary in your memo to the committee of the whole, and Todd Phelan, in the first paragraph, you talk about additional 10-year, they're requesting an additional 10-year property tax exemption to provide an annual cash flow and meet targeted investor returns. Do we have access to information? What are those targeted investor returns? Three of my questions relate to information, actually. That's one of them. Do we know what the desired project performance and developer return thresholds are? Do we have access to that? On the next page, it talks about the applicant has included financial scenarios that include the entire project and such. Do we have access to that information? And financial information showing operating cash flow, financial assistance. And then also you reference project scenarios that you developed or pro formas. I mean, I've got this memo. I don't have any really information. I mean, other than they saying, which on every project that we've seen that's come through it, they say they need assistance, but we never get to see numbers. I'd really like to see the numbers. So that's one area that I want to have addressed, whether Mr. Phelan wants to address that now or not, but.
I think if we could have Michaela maybe answer the questions, and then I would maybe ask Mr. Goss, what can we share? A lot of this is private business, but I think Michaela reviewed it, and if she'd feel comfortable answering those three questions, and then I'd ask Mr. Goss to.
Ms. Hewitt?
So in response to the questions, I know the rate of return is always a question, regarding what a reasonable level is. The typical range of investment, and I'll step back. We look at typically two methods. One would be the cash on cash, which is, or an annual return, which would be what the project is projecting to be on an annual basis once it's stabilized. And the second would be looking at over a longer period, typically 10 years, which provides that longer term investment return to the developer. We see typical ranges, and of course it depends on the type of project, the level of investment, the type of investment, and so on. But a typical range we would expect to see is between, say, 10 and 18%, and of course that's a large range. And what we try to understand is if the projected returns without financial assistance are below the range, then we would expect that the project would not proceed but for the financial assistance. And when we start to see the returns go above the higher range, that's when we reduce the recommended level of assistance to, again, try to provide it within that range. So I know that's a big range, but that's typically how we perform the analysis. And then there's additional kind of market data. And again, it's sometimes on a broader level of what the projected returns would be for this type of project. So that's a little bit of information on the investor returns, and I'll mention, so that's a little bit on the investor returns. Regarding the availability of the financial information, I would ask Mr. Phelan and Mr. Gosted to provide information on what can be shared and how to respond to that portion of it.
Thank you, Ms. Hewitt. Mr. Gosted?
I'll certainly respond to it. I haven't obviously talked to the applicant, but I would suspect that those financial informations are proprietary or confidential, that haven't been disclosed or made available to the public. And is my memory of the North Dakota open record law is those type of financial records are confidential for disclosure. If there was an ability to share or review those, you would have to go into an executive session for discussion review of those, and that's where it would lie, is if you'd go into executive session.
But I think it's safe to assume, based upon what Ms. Hewitt said, she's reviewed the financial projections that were provided, and they fell below industry standard, and came up with a recommendation to get them to essentially industry standard. Correct?
That's my understanding, and the information that's within the report is something that was the applicant deemed necessary for disclosure.
Certainly.
I would say, Council President Sandy, I think, Mr. Hodak's back there too. So the other person we did ask, obviously Mr. Hodak reviews financial information regarding assessments of properties, and obviously hotels are a major property right now with the hospitality industry challenges. And so Mr. Hodak did tell me in our larger city administrative group that there is a lot of risk, and he felt it was justified in this case, knowing that he's talked to a lot of hotel operators. And I don't know if Mr. Hodak would, provide his professional opinion on what he thinks about investments like this, knowing that he reviews performance also.
Great. Good evening, Mr. Hodak. Thank you for being here this evening.
Yes, thank you, President Sandy and members of the committee. We have, what Mr. Phelan said is true. The motels in Grand Forks have been under a lot of stress, particularly with no Canadian traffic. Our lodging tax revenues are down every year after year for like 6 years in a row. And then COVID hit and they went to the basement. So there's not a lot of people looking to invest in hotels right now anywhere, particularly here. I do consider this. When I think of the time I've been here and the exemptions that have been granted, I think this is one of the more risky ones in my opinion, as an endeavor, as a business endeavor.
Thank you, Mr. Hodak.
Thank you.
Mr. Carpenter, any other questions, comments?
Yes. I don't know who, but somebody could explain what exactly is opportunity zone funding and how is it, I mean, it's referred to as equity in here, so where does that come from? How is it arrived at?
I'll hand that one over to Michaela here too. It was a Trump era tax as part of the recent tax change. They created, the federal government created opportunity zones, I suspect, to get the tax changes and reductions across the finish line to try to help folks that have private equity to reinvest in their core of their communities and further develop their communities. If you look at the Beacon by Epic project, that's in the former Townhouse Hotel, I think they were going to try to utilize the opportunity zone, and this is probably our second project where we've utilized the opportunity zone. Our opportunity, you only had so many blocks, and way back in the day, we submitted several blocks. There was only so many blocks that went across the state of North Dakota, and we had 3 areas that got accepted as opportunities, federal opportunity zones that from the state of North Dakota through the governor's office, and eventually it ended up at the Department of Treasury where they accepted it. So it's basically the north and south sides of our downtown. And then if you drew a line, it kind of goes down University Avenue and Gateway Drive just before Columbia Road. And so that's kind of the definition of our opportunity zone. It had to have a lot of low and moderate income demonstrations and those sorts of things. But now I would turn it over to Michaela, and she can maybe explain how that it works as a financing perspective.
Ms. Hewitt?
Sure. It is an equity source. It's generated through capital gains, and really the intent of it was to provide additional tax incentives for this type of investment. Now, there are time limits. I'm trying to go back. It was developed, the program was created a couple years ago, and it was intended again to be a tax incentive for, and the source of equity is only capital gains, so not every source can be included. But the idea was that it would provide additional tax incentives for that equity, and it was one when the investment occurred and how long it was maintained within the opportunity zone, within that investment. And it provides a step-down deferral of taxes. And again, the assumption though is that it's a longer-term investment, and there's additional value realized when that asset is sold. Now, when the tool first came out, there was a lot of analysis done on what the additional benefits would be for equity that's through an opportunity zone. And while it does provide additional incentives and so on to the investor, it's not as impactful as it initially is thought of. So when we define it, it's still an additional or different equity source, if you will, that does provide additional incentives, but it's not as lucrative as initially was thought when understanding. And the reason why we looked at that is understanding traditional equity as opposed to opportunity zone equity, and if that had an impact on the level of public assistance that would be needed for a project. The ultimate response is, while it still might be, it still is an incentive, it's not as large of a benefit as initially assumed, and it doesn't remove the need for public assistance. And instead, the tool was actually created to try to get a project that was marginal up to a level that would allow an investor to participate. So it's and again, as Mr. Phelan said, it's more focusing on kind of distressed areas where the goal is, by including this additional investment tool that you would get, or excuse me, this additional program, that you would get additional equity in certain areas that would drive that private investment.
So in the table 2 there, the $7,255,000, where does it actually come from? Is it the private individuals that are putting the money in, or is it a governmental entity in the form of tax credit? How does that come into play to pay for the cost of the project?
It is private equity. It comes in from the equity, or excuse me, from the development entity itself. So it's not any kind of public assistance or other funding. It's private equity from the investor. And again, it comes from capital gains that's then injected into the project.
Okay.
I believe even after that opportunity zone, we're still, Mr. Hodak and others are still saying that it's a marginal project. Correct, Mr. Phelan?
Yeah, it is. And, you know, I've been at a couple briefings way back in the day when they created this, and really when the Department of Treasury briefed this. This is really intended not to replace local and state incentives, but I think, as Michaela has said, it was really trying to help on the top end of trying to get projects across the finish line. So it was really an intent of the federal government trying to move some infill developments forward in the cores of our communities, and not meant to replace or substitute any of those investments. And as I recall, Council President Sandy and Mr. Carpenter, I recall like an 8-year time period, and it would be sunsetted. And I think we're at least a few years into it. So as Michaela was saying, the benefit has already been extinguished from its maximum number of years at this point in time.
Mr. Carpenter, more questions? Yep, I'm sorry. Ms. Dorstead?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. So similar to the previous project, we put together the same type of illustration for you to show the property tax impact based on the assumptions used. As stated before, these are based on the assumptions that are listed on there. We for purposes of this, we held the property value constant, flat over the time period, and the number of mills the same. But we've divided this into 3 shaded areas that you can see there to show, as Michaela went through, as recommended, we have the Renaissance zone. That's the first shaded area, 5 years, 100% exemption. Then you have the next block of the 10-year period of the pilot with the first of those 5 years, so years 6 through 10, with that 100% exemption. And then finally, years 11 through 15, the final 5 years of that pilot, 80% exemption. So based on those numbers, a couple things I want to point out here. You can see the pre-project value of about 3.6 million. You see that go up from 2021 to 2022. The impact of that is the event center coming into the value. Through that first 5 years of Renaissance zone, that 100% exemption, that includes the exemption of the event center as well. But then when you look at the 10-year period of the pilot, that it only relates to the boutique hotel and does not relate to the event center. So I just wanted to point that difference out. And then, of course, going forward, you can see that incremental difference. Really what you're looking at is an incremental value of that 15.9 roughly $1 million due to the project. The table to the right there, you can just see the different metrics that are listed on there with the different time periods and a comparison of no project to with project collection estimates on that property tax. And it's broken out, of course, by taxing entity. And this is just a graphic then that will show you the blue line being without this moving forward for the project, the green line being with the project. You see that the reason why it dips down there and back up is just because it's the event center and the value in the beginning that goes to the 100% Renaissance zone exemption, and then that's not exempted, but the boutique hotel is. And then you can see the 20% taxable period and then going forward from there. But I'm here for questions if you have.
Any questions for Ms. Storstad? Anyone on Zoom have any questions for Ms. Storstad? Hearing none. Mr. Phelan?
And then as part of our public purpose, if I could have Ms. Rigg from Visit Grand Forks talk about the public policy portion, what it'll do, and then also Mr. Lund from a business development. And then I should have mentioned the developer himself is here, Mr. Kesey, so if there's any questions, I think he'd be willing to answer any questions also.
Ms. Rigg, nice to see you.
Good evening.
Thanks for coming tonight.
Thank you, President Sandy and committee. I'm here tonight to support the Olivan project on behalf of Visit Greater Grand Forks. And while I know our hotel, our tourism industry, our hospitality industry has struggled for a number of years, not just due to COVID, but prior to that it was the Canadian exchange rate. So while occupancy rates have declined over the last few years, we don't see this as that hotel that's going to compete for the team blocks and the convention business and that weekend Canadian getaway traveler. We see this as a property that's going to add more of that experience that we've been talking about so much. Experience, experience, experience. I think we've heard over and over again at these meetings. So with all of them being designated as a boutique hotel, I don't know if you know a lot about boutique hotels, but they typically provide that authentic cultural experiences. They provide special treatment, unique guest services, and as well as being very community oriented. So this is important for the Greater Grand Forks area because we host a number of visitors, influencers, travel writers, association executives, special guests, as the gentlemen from Fufang have been here over and over again, that we want to impress with our community. This will stand out as that type of property. It will also be a great addition to the downtown, allowing guests to be able to go to shows, dine out, shop right in that area, which is a very walkable area. And it will also help us package Greater Grand Forks as that unique destination and very entertainment oriented. So as some of you know, Roger Brooks, who's an expert on travel, tourism, downtowns, community branding, and destination marketing, was in Grand Forks a few months ago as part of a Northeast North Dakota tourism development program. He praised our community, our downtown, all of our community, and really said we are set to promote ourselves as an entertainment destination because of our events, our venues, and all the things that there are to do here. This helps us do that. That supports that continued growth and positioning us as that unique destination. This will help that effort even more by making that unique experience happen from the moment our guests get here till the time that they leave. It's also important to note that this isn't just about downtown. This is going to be a feature for our entire community. We will have guests staying there that aren't just here to do things downtown. They will be here for a number of other reasons, and I think that's important, that it's not just a focal point for downtown. Our crew at Visit Greater Grand Forks has wanted a boutique hotel for a number of years. Of course, it's been mentioned that many of our competitors do have some of those similar offerings, and I will tell you, it hurts us. I've been told that VIPs coming to Grand Forks sometimes have been placed in Fargo and have traveled back here, which is a knife in my heart, of course. So it definitely helps as that, positioning us more as that destination. And our team is ready to help through advertising, promotional efforts, everything we already do for our hospitality and travel industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rigg. Mr. Lund, something to add?
Sure. Never miss an opportunity. Thank you, President Sandy. I'm trying to remember how long ago it was, but the Economic Development Corporation Board of Directors considered 4 different projects, and 3 of those were downtown, including this project, although in a different construct. One of our strategic objectives of the EDC is to monitor quality of life determinants in terms of how that impacts the community, region, and more specifically workforce. And tourism and workforce attraction are really quite closely tied. So our board recommended that we as a board support and express that support to the various tasking entities for those 4 projects. So I'm comfortable. I have 2 board members here, so I guess they could say otherwise, but I'm comfortable in relying that support to you for this project as well. I think we've seen communities, and some not very far away, that have done a great job of sort of revitalizing their downtown, and I think that benefits the entire community, and quite frankly, I think that it benefits the entire region in terms of attractiveness. Even if you're living in a smaller community outside of the core regional center, you have the opportunity to come to an urban center and have a quality time, and that improves our ability and to support workforce attraction, workforce retention for the companies that we support. We can develop all the programs we want and do all the projects we want, but if we don't have the ability to attract and retain people to help work in those operations, then we're really not doing a full service to the community. So I'll re-express the EDC support of those 4 projects, including this, and we had recommended support. So happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Lund? Hearing none, thank you, Mr. Lund. Anecdotally, I'd like to mention that I lived in Fargo for 6 years, and I hated it. Don't like Fargo. I felt like it wasn't a community at all. But Fargo's downtown, when I was there, was okay. And then Hotel Donaldson opened, and it totally changed the downtown. It completely changed the vibe of their downtown. So many more businesses wanted to locate there just because it was a cool place to hang out, and it had the nice boutique hotel. It was a complete, and I believe that it is one of the main reasons why Fargo's downtown is continuing to thrive and expand, simply because they have that sort of an amenity. And I think for our community, not moving a project like this forward is really a wasted opportunity for us. But of course, that's just my personal opinion. Yes, Mr. Phelan?
I did ask Michaela, as we went through this, we wanted to look at, competitive projects in competitive communities, and obviously Fargo's downtown is great, and ours is great too. I asked this question of Michaela, and said they built a recent, downtown high-rise home to the RDO's corporate headquarters and also the Jasper Boutique Hotel. And she did follow up with the city of Fargo, and she gave me the answer that the city of Fargo, as part of that development, did grant that boutique hotel, I think it's called the Jasper, a 20-year, 100% tax exemption in that case. So I think when you look at competitive communities, that's how you get some of these across the finish line, and hopefully we're all here and alive 16 years from now, we can see the total growth of that valuation. But just as a comparison, since you brought up the city of Fargo, we did follow up on that, just as a sanity check in that case.
Thank you, Mr. Phelan. Are there anyone interested in comments or questions? Mr. Mayor? Yes, sir?
Well, I got all dressed up, so I might as well say something, huh? I think this project's been, borderline on the feasibility side for a number of years, so it's great to see, coming out of the pandemic that, it's coming forward again. We've set these opportunity zones and the Renaissance zones for a reason. I mean, the Renaissance zones goes to the subdivisions to approve, and there's a reason it's called a Renaissance zone. There's supposed to be, a renaissance of sorts there. It's obviously not the 14th or the 16th century, but a hotel downtown, and the only one as part of a boutique hotel, would definitely be a revival of sorts to that area. The project takes on a tremendous amount of risk. We want developers to take risk, and we want them to be rewarded with that risk. That's how we create jobs, we create growth in the community. So I guess it comes down to, this shouldn't be a rubber stamp by any means, so I appreciate the questions and the concerns, but this really comes down to, do we want this project in the city of Grand Forks, or do we want a parking lot there? And in order for it to be feasible, this is what has to happen. So again, this is another project that I support, and I think it keeps the momentum going in the right direction for Grand Forks, and it's a better place. And since the last one got built in Fargo, Dana ended up moving away, so we might be so lucky this time, and if it gets built, he might leave. So, Doug, that could be an opportunity for you. So, with that, I'll let it be. Thank you, President Sandy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Phelan, anything else to add?
That's all that we have. Mr. Giese, would you like to, maybe I'd like to call on Mr. Giese.
Mr. Giese, good evening.
President Sandy, members of the committee, Phil Giese. I'm the CEO of Edgewood Group of Companies and developer and owner of this project. I don't know if I can add too much. I'm happy to answer any questions that I can, but I did want to clarify maybe the Opportunity Zone Fund, and I'm an accountant and a tax guy as well. And the Opportunity Zone Fund is not what everybody says it should be. And I'll tell you why. Because number one, you have to use gain money to invest. So it comes from private investors. So if I sell a building somewhere else or a business and I have a gain, I can take that money and invest it in an opportunity zone like this, and I don't have to pay tax on that gain that year. But in 2026, I have to pay the tax in that year. So you have to pay the tax, it's just delayed a few years. So since it's 2022 now, you've only got a 4-year period, and then you have to pay the tax. Okay, then after that, and let's say you stay in the project for 10 years. After 10 years, and you sell the project, the gain you make on the project, not including depreciation. In other words, if I invest $27 million, I have to sell the project for more than $27 million for the opportunity zone to be an advantage. So the deferral on the gain on the opportunity zone is the amount of value above the original cost of the building. Now in this project, I don't believe the value is ever going to be greater than the original cost. In fact, it'll probably be less. So unfortunately, in this project, the opportunity zone offers virtually nothing. Now, I'll probably still use it if I can, but it's not going to be to the extent that I thought it would, just to let you know. So I think you need to know that going forward too. Like Michaela said, it's not what people think it is.
Right.
So
that's good information.
Any other questions?
Any questions for Mr. Giese?
One other point.
Yes, sir.
I'll make, because you asked the question, and I respect that question. The return on real estate investments these days are typically 10 to 18%. And I'll use my real estate investment trust as an example, who's not part of this project. So our real estate investment trust has been in business for 10 years. Our average return on investment, our IRR, is over 16% per year, 16%. So if somebody looks at this project, this boutique hotel project, I know I can invest in that REIT, and I know I can return 12 to 16% in a diversified REIT that owns real estate in 22 states. Or I can invest in this one property, and my math, which is, I think, very accurate, showed that the return was less than 10%. So why would I invest in this project when the return's less than 10% when I can invest at 15 or 16? And part of it is civic responsibility. I really do want this deal done. I want to make it happen for the community. I'm not sure I'm going to find a lot of investors. I hope I do. I may have to do most of it myself. But I think the community has got to ask the question, do you want to be competitive in this region? You mentioned the Jasper. I've been there, I went and stayed there. I want to see how they did business. We can beat them on quality. We can beat them on amenities, and that's the plan. Because nobody here wants us to build a hotel that can't compete against the Jasper or the Grove Hotel in Boise or some of the beautiful facilities down in Minneapolis. So that's the goal. So to do that, I got to spend more money. I could build a sleep-in downtown. I've owned sleep-ins. I can build that, but that's not what you want. Sleep-ins are great hotels, but it's not what you want in downtown Grand Forks. So that's really the difference, and that's why programs like this are so important. And developers like me really need these to get these deals done. So,
thank you.
Any other questions?
Mr. Giese, any other questions? Yes, Ms. Mock.
I guess kind of piggybacking on that point, you know, we have a lot of hotels in town that are struggling with pandemic.
Absolutely, I own one of them.
So in terms of this type of investment, are you seeing any indications that it's kind of a different market and maybe faring better or differently as we kind of navigate the COVID impacts and some of those long-term?
Yeah, well, the ADRs, the average daily rate for hotels in Grand Forks is probably $75 or $80 a night, right? I've got to have an ADR of $135 to $139 downtown Grand Forks to make this deal work. Okay, to get to $139 ADR, I got to be able to charge $179 when I'm busy, and I'm not going to be able to compete with a lot of the other hotels during the week. So my occupancy is going to be dependent on Thursday, Fridays, and Saturdays when we have weddings, events, and things like that, or the occasional business traveler that's willing to spend $179 a night on a room. So the key issue is the ADR and what's your occupancy. So, and that's where the struggle is on a hotel like this. If this was downtown Minneapolis, I wouldn't worry about it, because your ADR is going to be 179 or 200. So I'm going to struggle to get to 139. If I do, I'll do okay. I'll make my 10% return. Everybody will be happy. If I don't, I lose money on the deal. So.
Any other questions for Mr. Giese? Anyone on Zoom with a question? Hearing none, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Similar, Mr. Phelan, I think as the mayor pointed out, this comes down to the question of do we want a boutique hotel in our downtown? And it seems pretty simple to me. So I think, I think this has the potential to really change the landscape and change the future of our downtown. I think we should move it forward. But again, I'm only one. Are there anyone else with an opinion wants to?
I'd ask you, I'd ask you, Ms. Hewitt had the recommendation in her PowerPoint slide, so I would ask if you're gracious enough to us to move that forward, similar to what you do with the Fufang Group. I'd recommend the motion.
100% for years 6 to 10 and 80% from years 11 through 15.
Only on the boutique hotel, as described by Ms. Hewitt in her presentation.
Is someone willing to make that motion?
President Sandy, this is Tom Falk. I'll make that motion, and I also want to thank the city for engaging Baker Tilly and Ms. Hewitt on it. It makes the whole process so much easier.
Thank you, Mr. Falk. There's a motion by Falk. Is there a second? Second by Mock. Are there any other comments or questions? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Not unanimously. Mr. Carpenter dissents. Any other items for the good of the order? Mr. Phelan.
Thank you, Council President Sandy, and all the members of Local Government Advisory Committee and the whole city administrative team to put these two projects together. And I should say, and most importantly, the private investors that believe in Grand Forks. So thank you to all. More to come. We'll be back at your boards.
Great. Item 4 is adjourned. Is there a motion to adjourn by Mock? Second by Lancaster. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Good night, everybody.